Good afternoon. Welcome to Harris Hall. This is the afternoon session of the October 18th, 2022 regular Board of County Commissioners meeting. And we're all present in Harris Hall with the exception of Commissioner Bozovich, who will be joining as a hybrid. Anybody in the hall can see him on the screen to my left, to your right. So Mr. Mokrahajski, today we have a number of items on this afternoon's agenda. The first is a discussion on the Stabilization Center project and update. And I'll turn it over to you to introduce your panel.
Thank you, Chair, and invite Eve and Shauna. And are you all coming up? Well, I'm going to give my seat up then. I'll give my seat up, and I'm going to turn it over to Eve just to do introductions here. And
chairs.
Do we? Okay.
Yeah, we do.
Good.
I'll give my seat up, but you can't tap while you're up here.
I'm afraid of the gavel.
So Eve Bray, our Director of Health and Human Services, to talk about an update on a project that we've spent a lot of time, many years, and talked to the board about previously, but really pleased to be here today to give you, I think, what's going to be an exciting update and progress moving forward on this effort.
So welcome to our team. Dr. Gishohi, if you want to introduce the topic and the presenters, I can turn it over to you.
Sure. So we're here for an update on the Stabilization Center. I've been here a few times over the years, just giving an update. And today I'm super excited to be doing this presentation with Shauna Matt, who is one of our managers in behavioral health, and Brittany DeLiso, who is our newest member and the project coordinator for the Stabilization Center. Thank you. So today, the task really is to give an update on the siting, but we felt that it might be beneficial to do a little bit of the project history, and I'm not going to do a lot on the project history. I'll just do a very quick overview so we have time to kind of look at the latest updates that I haven't shared in the last few years that I've been here. And before I do that, I also want to acknowledge that there are so many other people involved in this project. I want to call out the other partners that are doing this work with us. We have the honor to be the ones presenting today, but there are a lot of other people that are involved in this work. I just want to acknowledge the effort and the energy that a lot of people bring to this project. So with that, just a quick overview. So for the budget year 1920, the Board of Commissioners put forward $1 million seed money after realization that we have this big gap in our system, and the community came together and recognized that this gap between behavioral health and the criminal justice and unhoused, that intersection of behavioral health, criminal justice needed to be addressed. So after many years of kind of looking at the spectrum, the continuum of care, we identified this big gap. And like Steve said, this has been a work in progress for a number of years. So we did identify that, and the seed money has been kind of put forward to start identifying what that work would look like. So in the last year or so, we've engaged with RI International. They were here with me a year ago, I believe, to kind of do a presentation on the work that they do. We've been consulting with them on a number of things, to include the capacity modeling, to look at their the design, to look at staffing models, just to kind of get an idea of what we would be looking at for a community of our size and what the Stabilization Center will look like. Just a quick overview, we're looking at both a center that will address the needs of adults and youth. Again, we started with adults, and as we got into the COVID, we realized that the needs of youth are also very much impacted, and we wanted to address that as well. So this work originally started with identifying needs at the jail, that a lot of the folks impacted end up in the criminal justice system and in the jail. It's since morphed to also recognize that we can impact a lot of other people through a Stabilization Center by kind of coming before the crisis, that we can actually do preventative work versus just doing the diversion from a criminal justice system, which is how we started this work. It started with addressing the needs of the jail. But while that is a part of this work, we are hoping that we can also really prevent people from ever going into the criminal justice. And with that, I'll hand it over to Shauna for the next segment of our presentation.
So just to continue to refresh on what we know currently, and what we have been working on since we presented to you all in January. We have provided about 40 presentations to community partners. That includes the general public, key stakeholders, folks who would be using this as a resource, about the goals and the needs that the Stabilization Center would be addressing in our community. We have secured 45% of the capital project funds that would be needed, thanks to you all committing that seed funding and then also the ARPA funding in support of the project. We've hired our full-time project manager, Brittany, to my left, and that has really kick-started a lot of boots on the ground work and growing partnerships. So we've accomplished a lot in the last 9 or 10 months since being here previously. And we've also launched an executive steering committee, which is a smaller group of key planning partners to support the existing crisis system steering committee and reporting back to the Mental Health Summit that really kind of initiated the inception of this project idea. Our executive steering committee is comprised of members serving a 3-year term. They include partners from the City of Eugene and City of Springfield, Lane County Sheriff's Office, some behavioral health partners, Columbia Care and Looking Glass, a consumer organization, Oregon Family Support Network, and our Peace Health Hospital partners, as well as representatives from both local CCOs, Trillium and And then to briefly get grounded in the financial aspects of this work, we are still working with an estimate of a potential cost to build of 19 million to be further refined as we move forward with any potential specific sites and the vetting process for doing so. And then an annual operational expense of approximately 15 million. And initially we do see a positive revenue over expenditures of 16 million in annual revenue and about 15 million in expenses. The main thing that highlights for our team that we continue to do work on and will continue to bring updates to all of you on is that this type of service really needs an alternate funding model in order to improve sustainability. So we are monitoring and investing in federal and state work around making sure that we're not just dependent on a fee-for-service or encounter-based kind of volume billing approach, and that we're really funding this as a total cost of care, paying for access 24/7 for our community members in the same way as other similar resources for the physical health system, such as an emergency department. I'll turn it over to Brittany to talk through some of the details around our site selection process and what we're bringing to you all today.
Yeah, thank you, Shauna. So today is primarily about providing an update on the journey that we have been on to determine a location for this program. And we recognize that most of the work to come really hinges on securing our location, whether that's property to build or to renovate, and are anticipating once we've confirmed this decision, much of the work will then begin to kind of domino out and more decisions are made. So we have a lot of anticipation about our conversation with you all today. We really wanted to be fully transparent around the process. Honestly, we're really proud of the process that we've navigated through, conducting due diligence to ensure that we have the right voices informing this and that it's really responsive to the entirety of Lane County community needs. So to give you a highlight of what that process has looked like, our internal county team continues to review the active real estate listings to this day on a weekly basis. And we'll continue to do that even through the preliminary parts of the decision making on our location until we have probably broken ground. I don't know our final point, but we just really want to ensure we're capturing every possible opportunity, even if some spring up while we're kind of engaging in this process. And then we have launched a short-term site selection committee. So this was related to the steering committee that we had initially. That was really the folks conducting this work, but we recognized we needed a focused group of really engaged participants that well represented our community's needs and that could actually put in the time and legwork to engage in some tours and review more of the details. So we facilitated this subcommittee that met a couple of times for discussion and review of kind of the site criteria that we had been considering, and then also engaged in a few tours that I'll mention. So that site selection committee had representation from Lane County Behavioral Health, the Sheriff's Office, Eugene Chamber of Commerce, and City of Eugene, Oregon Family Support Network, Looking Glass, the Child Center, Pacific Source, and Trillium. So a lot of the same key players in our executive steering committee with a couple different faces, then really inviting participation from our business community and recognizing the significant impact of the placement of this program on our local businesses. So that site selection subcommittee formally conducted two tours. I'll explain the two properties that were toured and kind of how we got there. And then they were involved, as I said, in that discussion and actually generating a recommended property that we then brought to our executive steering committee to further vet before bringing it to you today. So some of that site selection criteria, I'm told that you all have had access to this info at a previous update before my time, but just to refresh your memory what we're looking at. And this list was developed by our initial steering committee in partnership with our consultants at RI International. So looking at 29,000 square feet with 75 parking spaces, being appropriately zoned, within a 30-minute drive of approximately 90% of Lane County's population. We recognize there's caveats for our rural communities and kind of another conversation needed on how to really adequately support those areas and those regions and utilizing mobile crisis to do so. But we are looking at this brick and mortar location being within that 30-minute drive of the majority of our community members, being easily accessible for walk-ins, bus transport, and for other social service agencies to be able to drop off or refer folks to this resource. In the partnership that Pauline had mentioned around working closely with law enforcement, we wanted to have a space that could allow for designated law enforcement drop-off that's done in a safe and protected manner, and that would be facilitated by a Sally Port kind of separate entrance. So looking at a building that could accommodate that, and then also proximity to the emergency department behavioral health unit, knowing that we really want to partner and possibly divert from that resource too. And then of course cost and looking at building or renovation needs, that those are within kind of our timeline and cost projections that we have. So it's a tall order, you could say, that we were trying to find the perfect place. So just to kind of give some details around what our team and our committees have done, our internal team has vetted 35 plus, I think that's up to 40 as of this week, potential locations. So that's looking at that active listing and kind of running it through that preliminary criteria and seeing, is this something worth bringing to the larger group to further discuss? 10 properties were actually toured where it seemed like, oh, this seems promising. I think our Lane County staff team could allocate time to go see this space in person. And then at that point determined, oh, actually, there's A, B, and C reason why this clearly won't work. So we won't bring in our further site selection committee. All of these locations are available for folks to know where we've tried, trying to be really transparent throughout that process too. Also have engaged public comment and suggestions. We've had many emails of, did you try down here? Or do you know about this region? Or do you have this connection? And so followed through on each of those to really ensure we're being thorough. And most of where we landed is looking at downtown Eugene, Glenwood area, Gateway, West Eugene, South Eugene, Santa Clara, and Springfield. So if we think about that 30 minutes within 90% of our population, I think we covered all the key regions there to see where a viable location might be. And the results. So as I mentioned, we had that site selection committee tour 2 of the locations that met enough of the criteria that made sense to bring them out in person to review those. Those 2 locations are 75 West 5th, which is the old parole and probation building, and then what we've titled MLK New Build, which would be building on existing county property behind the MLK Primary Care County Behavioral Health Building. You see 190 West 8th listed there too. That was also a location that was toured prior to developing our site selection steering committee. And it was really through that process where we recognized we would benefit from a more focused group of folks that could really engage thoroughly in this review. So there you see a little nuance in kind of the tour process that we pursued. And then we've just highlighted, again, looking at that criteria, the matrix that we all used to score each location. Each site selection committee member completed a scoring matrix, and this was a bit of the summary that came from that. So we have pros and cons for each location that we wanted to present to you all for you to have visibility to. So looking at 190 West 8th, close proximity to the emergency department and the behavioral health unit, as well as the jail, accessibility and the zoning was appropriate. Looking at some of the cons of that location, it was significantly more space than needed. And I did include in the agenda packet the details of each of these properties, so it can kind of spell that out if you're wondering about actual size and other details. And then less proximity to some of our neighboring communities, specifically looking at Springfield having to drive into downtown Eugene versus some of the other locations we've looked at. The parole and probation building or the West 5th property, and again, pros would be proximity to the jail, of course, and also to the emergency department, behavioral health unit, easy accessibility for law enforcement, which is pretty clear, and county-owned space, which would factor in potentially to the cost. Some cons there would be there's an unknown amount of renovation needed and not clear on the cost there, but some suspicion that there might be a few major pieces to tackle, and concern a lot from our community members around the lack of trauma-informed kind of distinctions around that space being closely located to the jail and barbed wire fencing around. Just the aesthetic and location was concerning for folks, and then insufficient parking without a lot of flexibility to adapt there. And then the final location is this new build that we are proposing. Pros would be that there is adequate space to build on this county-owned property, still maintains that close proximity, not only to the ED and the jail, but 90%. This actually, if we looked at our full Lane County region, this was the most centrally located of each of the locations that we selected. And just as a call out, both City of Springfield and City of Eugene were really excited about the specific location and accessibility for both communities. And then this bullet point of promoting campus of connection. So that's a term that we've kind of sprinkled throughout this work, but really looking at how we can come alongside and align with existing services, existing within the crisis continuum itself, recognizing the stabilization center is really just being inserted alongside what already exists with our emergency department, mobile crisis, Whitebird, other programs. The MLK property is in really close proximity to the Hourglass walk-in crisis center through Columbia Care, of course, to many of our own county programs, other mental health programs such as Laurel Hill and Emergence. So really ideal for the literal warm handoffs and walking folks accompanying them to this resource. And then of course, accessible to the bus line and the community referrals. And the one primary con for this location is the seasonal traffic and land use. As we know, our partners with the football games happening and tailgating there. But we do recognize we have various county programs that are already navigating that and have learned some tips and tricks along the way. But that was voiced as a potential concern about this location. So that's really kind of the summary of where we've landed. I will say that our executive steering committee leaned heavily towards the MLK new build. Hopefully that's evident by the list of pros versus cons that we concluded, but really wanted to bring all of these options forward to you all. And we're going to take kind of a pivot in our presentation for this last chunk where I'll ask Eve to step back in. One other item that we had wanted to discuss was just really wrapping our heads around the scope of this program, which certainly hinges on the location and informs the location and our property needs, and also just kind of the duration of the project. So I'm going to ask Eve to speak to this piece a little bit more.
Thank you. And excellent job. I have to just give an incredible shout out and kudos to this team and to Assistant Director Inman, who couldn't be here today, who have really done a phenomenal job of spearheading community engagement efforts and bringing in key stakeholders from all over Lane County, as well as Jason Davis has gone out and done a number of these presentations. It's been all hands on deck to try and make sure that we got the community voice in this. So can't express enough appreciation to the team for the incredible work here. And the other piece that I need to talk about is the scope of the stabilization center. So of course, RI International did some modeling around what we need, and our preference is that we go with the big bang, and we have a 29,000 square foot facility that treats adults and youth and has recliners and beds and the ability to hold people for longer periods. We're also facing a couple of realities. One is a financial reality, that we have only about 45% of the capital costs that we need. We do hope that the legislature will help us with a big portion of the remainder of that in this next session, but that remains to be seen. We also have an operational funding gap of up to $5 million a year right now, because our the billing that we can do for the treatment of individuals in the facility is not expected to cover all of the operating costs. And that is true not just for year one, but ongoing. There is an initiative that is on OHA's legislative priorities for this coming session to have payer parity as a rule, so that stabilization center visits would have to be covered by all insurance carriers. That would certainly help us a lot in helping to close that operational gap. Today, Medicaid is the biggest payer for stabilization centers, and that isn't enough to be able to cover the full cost of operations. The other reality that we're facing is that there's an urgent need in our community for this to get up and running. So given all of these uncertainties and the urgent need, we are also asking for your thoughts and opinions on allowing us to consider a multitude of approaches, one that would be kind of that big bang with the big facility, and another that might be starting with something smaller so that we could get something off the ground that we could afford, and then grow that over time. I think the decision making on that will largely hinge on what happens this next session and what the funding picture looks like. But wanted to bring that forward to let you know that those conversations are underway, and get your thoughts and opinions on that.
Excellent. Thank you. Wonderful presentation. You know, how long has it been that we've been talking about this?
7 years.
A lot of years, since quite a while before you came. You were at the table long before you were with Lane Community College, Lane County. You know, and that's where I first met you, Dr. Gishohi. Excuse me. And you know, to me, originally this was a dream, and you're doing the work to make it happen. So we'll turn it over to the board for questions if you're ready for that. So to the board. We'll begin with the Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I am really, really excited that we're as far along as we are. You know, you see it in sight, and you're just so close, and you're doing wonderful work to make this happen. I really appreciate it. There was one slide in the bullet points of pros and cons for the MLK. One of the cons was land use, and I may have a different definition of land use issues than maybe you're talking about. I'm not sure if you're specifically just talking about because we have lots of games on MLK and it's that, or if there's actually a land use zoning issue with that particular property. So it's not that, because otherwise it would be a totally different issue. And I think that con would, you know, be much more challenging. then it is. So if it's just because it's the traffic and the activity on that particular site, then hopefully that's something that we can work with in the long haul. There was this back and forth about the potential opioid settlement money being able to be used for this kind of facility. There was excitement that maybe it was, and then maybe it's not an eligible use. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
So because we would intend to do sobering as part of this facility, I believe that it would be an eligible use. Right now, the dollars that we're looking at coming in are not anything near what we had hoped. But I don't know that all of the settlements have been completed yet. And of course, the state funds, we will still need to look and see what that's looking like. But we could definitely put, and I want to say that we did put it in the list of, oh, you guys are fantastic. Thank you. So there are a list of projects that different departments in the county have put forward as ways that the opioid funds could be used. And I know that there's a committee process to look at those. And I think there will be a process to bring those options before you as well.
So is it included in this calculation? It's not included.
No.
So there is a possibility that the gap could somewhat be closed with opioid money if that's something we as a board choose to use that money for.
At this point, we'd be looking at a partial gap, but gap closure, but that would be something that you could consider. It would be an allowable use of the funds.
And do we know how long it would take to build on that particular site? If we were to do the full mill deal, the vision that you've presented to us over the years, how long would it take to get that building up and running?
I don't think we have the answer to that yet. So we will be doing some preliminary work, and I don't know if Sean has anything to add there.
As I limp up here,
Definitely.
Chair, yeah, get the boot off on Thursday. Chair and commissioners, thank you. So this building is going to be very similar to what we just built with the Developmental Disability Services building. The difference will be there won't be any demolition of an armory. There will be some environmental study that has to be done, but very minimal. So we're estimating that probably construction will be, depending on lead times of mechanical equipment, no more than 18 months.
That's helpful because you've asked us our opinion on perhaps temporary facilities in the meantime. And of course, the longer it takes to build the facility, the more you're inclined to do some kind of temporary facility. What did you envision as a temporary facility?
It's unclear at this time. So, you know, there's lots of models that you could look at. If you're looking at something temporary to go up while you're building a permanent facility, there are some very nice modulars out there that healthcare facilities use all over the country. That could be an option. If, on the other hand, we were to say, you know what, we don't have the capital funds and we don't foresee having the capital funds in the near future, it would also be possible to build a smaller footprint of a facility that was designed to be added onto as we were acquired additional funds. So that's similar to what we're doing with the South Lane Clinic project, where we've identified a phase 1 and a phase 2 that will depend on funding in terms of whether we do just phase 1 or both of them together. So I think that there are multiple possibilities for how we could look.
One thing I wouldn't want to see is if we did a temporary facility, if we would delay the main facility, because the main facility is what we really know we need. And I imagine by the time we were able to build it, it could be at capacity quite easily. And so but at the same time, realistically, we need something right now. We've needed it for a very long time. Even a modular building with some staffing to get going at any point in time, I would be a proponent for, just to provide the service. But if you don't have, you know, what you need to do a temporary facility right now, that and you don't quite have the concept together, then we may be looking at a timeline that's quite close, in which case I would want my energy to go towards the larger facility. I'm interested in what fellow commissioners think.
For the discussion.
Jay does.
Jay, your hand is up. Yes, in fact.
Thank you. So I actually think temporary facility might not be a bad idea. And just so happens that one of the partners on your executive team, Looking Glass, has a unused facility on the same campus called McKay Lodge. Don't know how how much that might be able to be utilized, but might want to look into that one. So I had a couple questions, and one of which you mentioned talking to Cahoots and stuff in the progress, but I was kind of a little surprised not to see Cahoots or Whitebird on the executive steering committee as the probably the people that are dealing with these folks in crisis the most. Are they represented or have they been involved in the process so far?
Yeah, they are active participants on our crisis system steering committee. And we're engaging them around specific conversations, work groups, subcommittees, and tapping into existing community spaces around crisis system planning, just acknowledging their bandwidth and the amount of staff time that they're dedicating to providing the services day in and day out, and then also informing these larger system processes. So absolutely.
Great. I was wanted to make sure that was happening. I'm sure the public wanted to hear that too, that they were involved.
I'm also happy to take the one on McKay Lodge, which is that it is currently vacant, but there are Measure 110 funds that Looking Glass is going to use in order to renovate that facility, and they have plans for programming in that building. So I'm working closely with them, as is the entire team, to make sure that their programming is consistent and will complement all of the programming that will be on the site with the stabilization center. So excited that those funds could be used in that way. Excellent.
Good. One question as we're talking about the planning for this, so many of these kinds of facilities were caught short during COVID due to the inability to protect against infectious disease. Is there any planning up front that we can make this a little bit more resilient if we get the next COVID?
So I'm going to start taking a stab at it, and the clinical experts can weigh in and correct anything I get wrong here. Part of the design of a stabilization center is to have a pretty wide open space, and you do that for a couple of reasons clinically. One is just that it allows staff to keep an eye on everything that's going on, and there can also be some trauma responses to folks who are in crisis who are in enclosed spaces. So because of those reasons, it would be difficult to create a space that we could easily segregate individuals in the case of another pandemic. But I will defer to all of you to add or correct.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And actually just a note that the Deschutes Crisis Center actually started during COVID and was operating during COVID. And a lot of what they did was just utilizing the protocols, just being mindful of utilizing, wearing masks, washing hands, all that. So I think we do the best that we can given an epidemic and, follow the protocols as much as possible. The good thing is that we know that Deschutes operated. They did not shut down. They actually created the facility during COVID and operated it throughout the whole pandemic.
that's great to know. Because you know, who knows what the next thing coming is. So kind of not so much a question, but kind of comments on some of the funding source, particularly operational funding. As we discussed this morning when we were talking about public safety, there is still on the table a 1115 waiver for adults in custody for Medicaid. If that does go through, our current jail contract's about $5.5 million a year. If a significant portion of that were to be reimbursable, it would free up some operational funding. Of course, you know, currently LCSO and they've got their own budget issues, but just something to push for overall as far as freeing up money, annual operational money in the county budget. The other thing I'm kind of wondering about, and this is somewhat an idea and somewhat a question, is having a behavioral health facility like this will avoid a lot of misdemeanor arrests for people in crisis, which generates the largest amount of aid and assist load for OHA in the state hospital system. Is there any way to approach OHA for both capital and operational money on an aid and assist avoidance, kind of like with the Justice Reinvestment Act, where we're avoiding prison bed usage, or avoiding state hospital bed usage? Don't you think that's something the state might provide funding for?
So I think that OHA has, with their budget proposals with an investment in crisis and stabilization, that is their way of investing, and I'm hopeful that that those dollars come through. I think, like always, we would love to have more dollars, and I think that would make it more sustainable. Though the investment that they're looking at is, I think, in the neighborhood of $100 million. Is that correct?
It's more than that. It's like $300 million.
Oh, for the
For the
full
whole,
thing,
yeah.
but then the 100 million is the stabilization center
correct.
portion. Okay, thank you. And also just a quick status update on the Medicaid 1115 waiver. The waiver itself was approved and will start to be implemented, but the portion on justice involved individuals continuing their Medicaid coverage was not approved in the Medicaid 1115 waiver. Now, CMS is telling us that the reason for that is because so many states have asked for that modification that they did not want to approve it in a one-off through a state's individual 1115 waiver. They say that they're working on an alternative solution. But at this time, we do not have any timelines for when that solution might come into place.
And we've received that same update this morning.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner. Further discussion?
I have a couple of business things, so I want to do that last so it doesn't interfere with the content. But I'll go if you'd like to be last, Commissioner. Oh,
Well, you know, while
Yeah, okay,
we're
I'll go
funding
ahead.
this back and forth, a couple of things really quickly from me. Regarding a temporary home for the stabilization center, I would be okay with that if it were something that didn't suck away funds from other, if it was something we could move into kind of ready to rock and roll rather than have to rebuild something. And, we mentioned when we were Ms. Mokrowski, Steve, when we were looking at the youth facility, we looked at the McKay Lodge, of course. We also looked at one of the pods in the Serbu Center as a potential home for the youth facility. A lot of things came up that made it not possible, access, adjacencies, et cetera. But as far as a temporary facility, that's the Serbu is not on the list of that was looked at for the permanent facility. But for a temporary facility, think about that, see if it would be something that could be used should we have to go that route. And I'm sorry I jumped in. You would rather other commissioners speak first because usually they say what I would have said anyway. Commissioner Burney.
I always say what you would have known. Thanks, Mr. Tree. That's fine. First, that was an awesome presentation. I mean, you're all very articulate, and my hat's off to you. first some questions leading up, and then you did ask about perhaps alternatives for financing. Is this the same facility that at one time we thought we had a building for, but some of the occupants around that building didn't want that to occur? Was that what we're talking about here?
We were, yes, the 8th and Oak, what's the address?
Well, that's okay.
The 8th and Oak facility was the property that we were looking at and began to have some conversations with businesses and the city of Eugene, and there were some concerns about the location of that facility.
And was that January-ish?
That sounds, gosh,
Well, I started in January. I think I was maybe 3 months in.
March.
The reason I'm thank you.
Yeah.
And actually, the reason I'm mentioning this is we could be talking about this for a long time. So I agree with Commissioner Farr in terms of his very technical rock and roll statement. It certainly seems to me that there are locations, if it doesn't take away from other revenue sources, to do something, anything, as it relates to the urgency point you were making. So that's just my own thought. How are you thinking of going more than one story? Because I'm thinking in terms of the size lot one would need for parking and 29,000 square feet. What are you thinking? Are multiple stories possible? Are you thinking it needs to be one story? Hey, I'm sure you appreciate that question, Sean.
Yes,
Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. So at the MLK site, it is possible to do 2-story very easily. It is also possible to spread out into 1-story, and given the amount of space that we have out there, we can easily get 75 spots.
Okay. In other words, we can go 1 or 2 or 3 stories depending upon the site that is selected. I don't know if you might want to stay up there if it hurts you to walk like it does me. I would like to share, in addition to really believing in temporary as soon as possible to deal with the urgent need. Ironically, I will know in 6 weeks, but I actually attached an opportunity zone by a fund which wants to fund healthcare facilities to a project in a healthcare, from previous relationships, a healthcare desert in California. And they are right now negotiating an $800 million hospital, which Kaiser's going to lease. If in fact that moves forward, it's interesting because this is an equity-based form of financing. I'm not going to get too technical, but one of the things that enables is no debt service. So for the first 5 years, there will be no payment of debt required beyond the rents that they will be receiving, because they want to get the best tenants possible in the facility. They require a 10-year refinance event, and the city in this instance is planning a bond, and if a bond does not pass, an alternative mechanism. They're very interested in Lane County, but I want to see them close a transaction. Until they do, in my world, they're not real. If they do close a transaction, though, Eugene and Springfield, as you know, have opportunity zones. And Glenwood, you mentioned, is one of them. And I know a 1-acre parcel that's not on the market, where the owner would be very interested in Glenwood with water and sewer to the site on the river, that would be very interested in this activity. So as we talk about it, if you really want to talk about financing that's interesting, public-private partnership, not just government, I will, through Mr. Mokrahysky, let you know whether these people can do transactions or not. And if they can, if it's of interest to you, I'd love to make some introductions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I have a couple of questions and then just some comments, overarching comments. First and foremost, I'm a fan of whatever gets us this service as soon as possible. We all know we're long overdue to be able to provide these services to the community and that it's costing us a lot to not provide these services. So I appreciate the challenges around funding and costing, but we're burdened by the cost of not providing this service as our people in the community. My biggest concern or question about the idea of a temporary site is we have workforce challenges, and the sooner we try to get operational, the sooner we collide with that reality. So, anything you want to share about the pace of being able to staff up a facility relative to a temporary versus wait just a little longer for a permanent one is my first question.
What? Wait, were you asking me to, or you? So we're all looking at each other because the workforce challenge is not an easy one to solve. So I think that we are looking at creative ways of how we build a workforce. A couple of items that have come up for us as we've gone through this process, and that may be helpful from a policy standpoint. One is, of course, just the tuition barrier for folks. It's too expensive to get your master's degree, and folks don't make enough in this industry. And so the more we can lower barriers there, the better. But even then, a big part of the workforce in the Stabilization Center is made up of peers, individuals who have lived experiences. And something that I have been so impressed with Pauline's leadership in the area of peers and the use of peers. And yet the barriers that behavioral health faces in some of the background check requirements, that someone who has a history where they were in crisis and where they did things that they now regret, those things haunt them. And it makes it very difficult to staff even the level of a peer, which is a 40-hour training requirement. So we definitely have systems barriers that I think we can address on the policy side. We're also currently engaged in conversations with partnerships in the community with nonprofits and also with local universities that are offering programs to see what else we can do to partner together to build up our behavioral health workforce. But it's not an easy answer. And I think whether we open something sooner on a smaller scale or whether we open something in 5 years on a big scale, we will be dealing with the same challenge.
Thank you. Before I go on to, I want to, like I did this morning with our Lane Event Center, for anyone from the public watching, remind or let folks know, because our website is as complex as our organization. It's hard to find sometimes. There is a designated web page for this work and this project, and it's LC, as in Lane County, lcstabilizationcenter.com. And there's some good information about the project and the timeline and some recordings of presentations. So just flagging that for people's information. My other comments and about citing and about the need for this. I mean, yes, this really rose to the top of priorities for the board because of that intersection with criminal justice and folks who actually need treatment and behavioral health services, not law enforcement. But that's not the only population that this is for. This is really a facility for our whole community. And we know there are people all over our community at all ages, all demographics, all income levels that need and deserve behavioral health services. And so I appreciate that's the genesis, and we always have to fold that into the conversations, the updates. But I also think there comes a point, and this leads into the conversation about citing, where when we keep the conversation about this being a missing piece in our criminal justice system instead of in our caring for our community, is part of why we have the challenges we have with citing. And again, fully in support if there were to be a staff recommendation to use the MLK campus, because that's the way we get the facility we need on the timeline we need it, then I'm supportive. But I can't not mention just my personal disappointment, frankly, with our community, not with our staff, not with this board, but with our community for the lack of vision and willingness to be part of the solution. And to be part of changing the culture around how we see and understand the need for behavioral health and mental health services. The parity issue around billing is critically important for us for operations, but the parity issue around people understanding that mental health care is health care. And by some folks really digging in and resisting citing a facility like this in a place where they wouldn't necessarily resist citing a physical health care facility is really concerning and really disappointing and really something we all have to work more on as we do this. And the counter side to that is I appreciate, the cons that you put up there around traffic, but there are some concerns about overloading services and consolidating services in one area. I mean, some ways it's efficient for us as an organization, but it also sends a message to community that, quote, those people who need those kind of services all go to this place. And those people live everywhere and among us and deserve to have services spread out the way we spread out all kinds of other services. So that's a real concern of mine and something I'm really committed to being part of our responsibility to keep the conversation going in the broader community about who uses these services and why and where we need them. Because even if we move forward and we build the full 24,000 square foot at MLK, down the line and in the future, we're going to need more facilities to deliver these kind of services to our community. We're going to have to get them other places eventually. And people can come along with us on that as a vision of what we do to care for our community, or they can resist it every step of the way, and we can do it with a whole lot of ill will, and I would prefer the former. So I just wanted to make that statement, appreciate the presentation, and say that I'm fully in support of whatever we can do to get services up and running as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And as I predicted, I don't need to say much, but I will say a couple of things. I'm absolutely, once again, I've been dreaming about this since the first time I heard of it. To me, it was really simple. Now, what you're demonstrating is it's not particularly simple. There are a lot of intricate parts that go into this. And for me as the dreamer, dreams come so easily, just close your eyes, you can have one. But really getting the intricacies of making it work and where to make it work. So that being said, I'm a strong proponent. I like the MLK campus idea for a number of reasons, because of the available property, because it's county owned, and because it would not do exactly what Commissioner Trieger says, we shouldn't worry about, or we shouldn't have to worry about. It doesn't create adjacencies to neighborhoods that would potentially reject it. Now, we all know that we would like to disperse services. In fact, in my neighborhood, we had a wonderful plan on school district property to add a 16-unit, 11 to 16 unit high school boys facility. The neighborhood didn't want that. These were kids who would have been in high school, who would have been not hanging around the neighborhood and really wouldn't have created any sort of a stir at all. So even things that just disrupt your lifestyle a tiny little bit in your brain are gonna raise those objections. That's one reason I do like the facility being constructed out at MLK campus, because we have a chance to demonstrate what this kind of a facility will look like, that it's not what people fear. This is a place where people get helped, where people who otherwise would be disrupting people's lives on the street are being helped to lead them back into a normal lifestyle, whatever normal happens to be. So I like it. I like the idea of moving forward as quickly as I can. I like the possibility of 1, 2, or 3 stories, because we do have a lot of space out there that is currently being used sometimes by Washington Husky fans for tailgating. But that being said, there's a little bit of a juggling game there. But I like the thought of that. The other thing I'll mention is Director Gray, you mentioned that an open space is the best way to care for folks in this type of an environment, where you can kind of see every doorway, basically, so to speak. Well, that is the salmon pod out at MLK. It was built to be a security juvenile facility where you can actually see every door. Now, the doors look like, feel like, and actually are cells. So it's not trauma-informed by any stretch of the imagination. But for a temporary facility, it may be something to consider. But Godspeed, what I mean by that is, I hope our horses are running very, very fast, because we're behind already, even though we are ahead of other communities. And I think it's safe to say that what has happened in Deschutes County isn't quite what we're going to be looking at. what Marion County is considering, what other places are considering isn't quite what we're going to look at, which leads to my next point, and that is when OHA is looking at $100 million out of the 300 million to spend on behavioral health crisis centers, stabilization centers. I worry that they were going to want their cookie cutter approach to it. That's not going to be exactly what we're doing. You know, I think we're looking more like at a Pima County model than what OHA may have in mind. And I'm not sure how much you've spoken with OHA and how their vision, how they understand what it is that we're doing here. Because I've seemed to, whenever I talk about it, it's like, well, you know, that's not exactly what, finish the sentence. So any response on that? You're nodding a bit.
Yeah, we appreciate the question and very much on the same page. So we have spoken with OHA as recently as 2 weeks ago around that exact question and learning more about the policy option package that they submitted, the model specifics that they would be looking at the state level as far as the expectations, the draft Oregon administrative rules that would serve in support of these types of centers. And they are actually working with our same consultant team in that design process. And they've also communicated that they are in support of whatever brings these resources to the community in whatever shape or form that might mean. And acknowledging that there may be a national kind of best practice, you know, purported by SAMHSA, and that needs to be customized to the existing infrastructure system and needs of each community. So they've come out and said that they are supportive of us customizing that model.
That is encouraging to hear that, because I've not heard those words from them. I'm not talking to them at the same level as you, but sometimes, you know, we have, for instance, you know, Director Allen right there in the meeting with us, and you don't always get the same tune from the director as you would get talking to somebody who's actually doing the work. I shouldn't say it that way, but really the people who are actually figuring out the details of the work. So that's encouraging, because when we are talking about this stabilization center in Lane County, you've been thinking about it for a long, long time. This is not, we're just, oh, well, how could we possibly do that? We've been thinking about it for a long time. And other communities haven't bought their shovels yet. And we're already moving backhoes in place, basically, you know, so it's, we're ahead of the communities in what we're doing. Plus there's an innovative way that we're looking at it, Doctor, that I believe is different than anybody else this side of Arizona, maybe. So,
And I just want to add one more thing. When we met with OHA a couple weeks ago, they're actually very excited about our program and partnering. There's going to be a lot of learnings together with OHA. They are trying to figure out licensing and the different aspects of the programming. So there is flexibility, which is very encouraging. When we asked to have that meeting, I was afraid of the same thing that you are concerned about. Like, they're going to want us to build the same exact, you know, facilities across the state. And they were like, no, we want to make sure that whatever you do works for your community. So we have that commitment from OHA.
Once again, encouraging words, and that allows me to put my eye shades back on and get back to dreaming, which is what I do the best. Commissioner Buck, then Bernie, is that okay? All right.
To follow up on your line of questioning there, for the $100 million, is that what you were referencing in this upcoming legislative session, or is that separate? So it sounds like that will be allocated in this upcoming legislative session to potential projects.
That's the request from
That's
OHA.
the request. Great. And do we have a $19 million total cost to build. That cost was a while ago. So as we know, all costs have been going up. And you'll be putting that maybe here she comes. We know that we'll have to update our numbers in order for you to submit your gap dollar requests. In that 100 million, is it specifically for capital construction? Is it for also any kind of operational for any number of years? And Sean, since you're here, what kind of difference in costs are you seeing? And it sounds like as we continue forward, we'll need to update these numbers for future meetings.
That is correct, Chair, Commissioners. So one thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that $19 million amount also includes the purchase of land. So that piece would not be applicable here. So then we're just looking at construction. So when we look at construction, the DDS building, for example, was around 11 million to construct. So we're looking at something around that area because inflation for a lot of our materials hasn't increased significantly since we built that building. We have been looking at about 13% kind of holding steady for our materials at this point.
So if we're talking about 11 million instead of 19 million, do we actually have a gap for capital construction on MLK?
So Chair and Commissioners, we do. So right now we have 7.5 million in ARPA funds that have been allocated. So that will get us to a design point. And I'm going to say we're probably looking at a couple million for design. And then we also have that construction component. So with the 1 million that was set aside a couple fiscal years ago, in addition to the 7.5, we are still at a deficit.
We have a total of 8.5 now.
Well, and Chair and Commissioners, correct me, I think maybe you have spent some of that 1 million with your consultants, and I don't know how much of that has been spent.
Okay, so you've already used up the original million for getting us to this point.
Not all of it. We've used some of it, so not all the 1 million, but we've used some of it for consulting.
I'm just trying to get to the
Right.
actual numbered gap.
So I think we don't have all of that specific information right now. The 19 million was an RA International estimate based on their national knowledge of these projects around the country. So next step, as long as we have head nods from you all, because it's within Mr. Mokrahysky's authority to sign for an environmental review of the MLK site. That would be the next step that we would need to undertake. And from there, we would look at bringing in an architect, provided no concerns of substance came back on the environmental review, and hopefully then would get a much more specific capital estimate where we could really give you clearly what that gap looks like. In terms of the $100 million POP that OHA has put forward, that includes mainly capital expenditures. It's 4 months of operational funding. So it really doesn't get us very far down the pathway of being able to open and run a facility. We would be taking great risk to do that without finding a more sustainable source of funding.
Great. Sounds like I'm ready for the next meeting already, but we're not quite there.
You ready to start nodding your head? Is that- Commissioner Burning.
First, I would really like to state, Commissioner Trieger, I really appreciate your remarks. I 1,000% agree with them. I agree with them so much. Has that building been bought yet that we were looking at half a year ago? Seriously, has it?
It is not under contract as of the last time we checked.
As of about a month ago.
I find it fascinating that we want to be good partners, but I find it fascinating. One of you, and this is not critical, talked about the impact of placement of this facility to the local business community. That really sounds like we're bowing down and saying behavioral health, which is part of, or mental health, which is part of healthcare, is not important enough to be cited in different parts of our community. Now, I don't expect this body's going to change it. I just wanted to thank you for your remarks, Commissioner. Vice Chair, excuse me. So you know what I'm getting now? I didn't know this. All this is so that you'll get head nods for Mr. Mokrahysky to let you do an environmental review at the campus. If that's what it is, I'm fine with that. But is that, I mean, is that like the short
Well,
version of what you would like today?
That's the short version of what the next step in the process is. We will actually bring an order at the point that we go for an architect. And then you would be officially voting in support of a specific site.
So I was under the false impression you were looking for other ideas. I apologize for my talking about other ways to finance this and another location now that I know what the agenda is. Thank
Well,
you.
You're good, and we may still take you up on that. It's possible, as was said, we're going to continue to look at available sites as we go through this process.
And I completely concur with Heather Buck. Show us the numbers, how we can get started. Let's get started. And I just find it so sad that Chair Farr's point, which is well taken, which was that we're ahead of other communities, doesn't change the fact that we're behind the needs of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. And back to you, Vice Chair Trigger.
Thank you, Chair. I just appreciate Commissioner Burney's comments and knowing that that building on West 8th is so far not under contract. As you said, you're continuing to explore other locations, and I assume that means keeping locations already explored that haven't been ruled out for some reason internal to this organization also stay on the table. Because the one thing that, as you talked about, if we're going to talk about impact on business community, that site is larger than we need, strictly speaking, for these services, but we talked about all the other wonderful ancillary and co-locating opportunities to bring more gainfully employed professionals into the core of our downtown who are working on that site. So I'm pleased to know we're not taking anything off the table until we make a final decision. And I'm glad to know that building is still potentially in the mix.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And Steve, go ahead, please.
I just was gonna make a couple comments about the sort of current line of comments and questions that you've offered, and you know, related to the property on 8th Street. I think it is true that we went out and moved as we've done oftentimes, right? Moved quickly on that property. We felt like there was a lot of benefit. We thought the proximity, a lot of things you saw here in terms of what we're looking for, the location of a facility proximate to the hospital and the corrections facility within 30 minutes of the area that law enforcement, primary local law enforcement can access. We thought it all had benefits. I think we ran up. So part of this process has been listening, right? Taking a pause and going out and engaging. You heard the 40+ meetings that we've had with various groups and individuals and stakeholders, really engaging folks in this effort more broadly, and also understanding that, you know, we still have work to do to educate, inform, and communicate and engage with the community around what this facility and operation is going to do. I'll speak for myself that I was rather disappointed in that last process. And so I just want to say, like, to Commissioner Burney, your comment about, you know, bowing to the concern. I don't know. I don't view it that way as much as trying to understand what those concerns were. Acknowledge that even though we feel like some of those concerns were misplaced because of a lack of understanding about what this facility is going to do and the accountability there, that the reality is we need the support of the community. And Commissioner Trigger talked about this, you know, I look at where we've been able to pull together partners and had a lot of great success. Our Shelter and Navigation Center is a joint partnership with the city of Eugene, right? Where the county went out and purchased the facility and got the funding for renovation, but we're funding the operations jointly with the city of Eugene. Well, the same is true here. And so while we are concerned about the capital cost, the upfront cost to construct a facility, we ultimately need to be able to operate this facility, and we need community partners, namely our city partners and our healthcare partners, to participate in that effort if it's going to be successful. So the other point I just want to make about this campus is one of the things we do want to keep in mind is that this is a large campus on MLK, but we do have a youth component, right? So we have a juvenile detention facility and we have a high school. We oftentimes forget that we're operating a high school there. And we have other youth programs, talked about Looking Glass and other youth programs that run there. So it is important that anywhere we go in the community, there's likely to be some conflict. And this is even true on our own campus at MLK. And so we are working in partnership with the folks there at Youth Services to make sure that whatever additional operations we have here on this campus do not negatively impact the youth and families that we're also serving. But there's a balance of accountability and service to the community.
Clarify.
Continue, please.
I'd like to clarify, Steve. What I said was the language quote, the impact of the placement of this facility to the local business community. I said, those words sound like we're acquiescing to those concerns. The other thing I would like to say, and then I'm done, Chair, I won't keep talking and talking, is when I was a little kid, I've been in circles where you say something all the way till now, where you say something and people go, that's a terrible idea. And it goes around the circle and people have their little thoughts about it, comes around the circle, and by the time it's around, it's a great idea.
Or it's their idea.
Or it's there, well, that's why it's a great idea.
Right.
So the moral of this anecdote is that might be possible as it relates to that facility, which is why I was delighted with the answer to Vice Chair Trieger's question. Is that still on the table? I just wanted to clarify why I said what I said.
No, and I really,
Thank you, Chair.
Chair, just to brief response, I really appreciate that. I think you're, in that arc of the information going around the table, we're not all the way around the table to the point that everyone has understood what a good idea this is. And I think for those folks here at the table and others who have been a part of this work for so long, that understand what the impact is going to be, they understand the evidence-based practice, the actual examples in other communities that have done this. It's hard to feel like the rest of the community, particularly partners that we need at the table that are going to most benefit.
So one scenario is at the end of the circle, this can be the Eugene Chambers idea. And another question, when you talk about partnerships, that raises, which we didn't chat about earlier, does that mean we're partnering with the city of Eugene on this particular outdoor facility? I'm very interested to know what their contribution will be. Thank you.
So I think one thing that I would like to say, and it is worthwhile to have the conversation again with our steering committee. The West 8th property is also, of all the properties, very, very Eugene centric. And I do think that that our partners in Springfield, our partners to the east in particular and to the south, when they're looking at transporting someone, the proximity to I-5, the proximity to the city of Springfield of the MLK site is very attractive, rather than having to navigate downtown Eugene every time they would like to drop someone off for services at the facility. So it is not just perceptions of those around that site. There were also some pieces to take into consideration in terms of accessibility.
Thank you for that, Director Gray. And I will go back to something that you said, Ms. DeLiso, that even as we move forward with what seems like potentially the ultimate site, you're still continuing to monitor other real estate and other options. And right until the 11th and a half hour, we're looking at other options. And I would assume that the 190 West Broadway, is that the number, is going to be something that we continue to look at to see if something should spring up and make that work. But I do understand, it's not easy to get there from Springfield, because you have to either go through the university campus, all the way through downtown Eugene to get there, or around on I-105, and that's a circuitous route. So all of this goes into the final decision making, a large part of which I enjoy watching you do the work on that, because there's a great deal of work that goes into this. And I will say that the entire state is watching, because the more we talk about it, the more we talk about what we're doing here, maybe we're going to shift the way they look at things in the other parts of the state, and they'll use some of our research to inform their decision making process. So with that, Ms. Waite, anything you need to add?
No, thank you.
I can't believe construction costs haven't gone up.
No, they're actually starting to stabilize a little bit. So,
Well, if you watch Random Lengths, lumber, plywood's,
yeah.
but that's not all we build with. So, all right. Well, London and plywood is dropping rapidly, but it's dropping from
The stratosphere.
Exactly.
the $5 2x4 8-foot, which means nothing to anybody, but that's an expensive 2x4.
But to me.
All right. Very good. Then any further discussion? Wonderful presentation.
She needs head nods.
Oh, do you need head nods to give Mr. Mokrzycki the go ahead on the environmental?
Yeah, we
It'd probably be good, just so we have at least a head nod on record.
This is going to be a tough one. Anybody in favor of this? Okay. Commissioner Bozievich? Okay, I think we got thumbs up around the board. So thank you very much. Great presentation. We'll look forward to the next one. The next one will be a little bit closer to finality and real decision making. So wonderful work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's just two.
Mhm.
It's been good meaty discussion.
Well, this one's gonna be-
I know that's unusual a lot of the times. Thank you, Chair, for giving us that.
This morning.
Yeah.
That's great.
I just remembered I'm the chair, so I need to bring us along the agenda right now. I'm just basking in the warmth of that presentation, Ms. Mokrycki.
Great.
Then we're moving along to item 10B, which is continuing with Health and Human Services. So Director Gray is staying with us. It's a discussion, progress with unhoused population initiatives. And Mr. Mokrycki, I know everybody who's here, but please turn it over to your panel.
Thank you, Chair. And as they're getting set up,
By the way, some of my great heroes are at this table today.
and they, Kate and her team always do an incredible job with these updates. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Eve to introduce Danielle.
All right. Well, I think the introductions are made, right? Go ahead and you can get started, and then I'll be here to pepper in commentary as I always am.
Well, I'll introduce Danielle Bautista, who is a program coordinator too on my team. Danielle has a focus on serving folks who are chronically homeless throughout our community. And one of the things I really value about Danielle is that she has a passion for this population and has a great deal of experience providing direct services as a community service worker and in other direct service roles. So Danielle, thanks for being here today. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I can slide that toward you a little bit if you want.
That's
Is
great.
it okay, Neil? Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to speak to two project updates, and I'll first start with the NEL Permanent Supportive Housing. I first off want to say that the NEL Permanent Supportive Housing is really a collaborative effort, and I feel very fortunate to be able to speak on behalf. But I just want to call out some partners that were really involved in this. Homes for Good is our lead, the developer and owner of this project. Laurel Hill Center is the service provider. And we have Quantum Residential doing the property management. Lane County, we have lots of roles. Primarily my role in that is overseeing the services contract with Laurel Hill Center, and we provide all of the referrals to the project. And again, there are several others, Essex Construction and many. So the NEL is a 45-unit permanent supportive housing project. They are studio apartments. There's a community room on site. There's on-site laundry, offices for supportive services and property management. And there's 6 fully ADA units. And then there's bike storage, lots of, many of you just recently went to the open house. And I think I saw all of your faces there, so that's great. And this serves individuals who are chronically homeless. So this is for people who been experiencing homelessness long-term. Often by definition, it's at least 12 months in the last 3 years, and they have disabling conditions. So permanent supportive housing really pairs affordable housing with services. So that key of helping people transition from experiencing homelessness into housing and making sure that they get the wraparound supports that they need to stay stably housed. And of course, this project, the intent is really to provide a low barrier and housing first model. So the idea is let's get people in housing first, and then, but that's not housing only. So not only are you getting them in with as few barriers as possible, but you're going to provide them with the different services that they need to be successful there. And then it also, the rent is provided by project-based vouchers through Homes for Good, the housing authority. So here's a little snapshot. A snapshot of the residents at the NEL. So I mentioned that the folks are chronically homeless. That means that they have to have a reported disabling condition. But here's just some stats on 87% of residents have self-reported a mental health related disability, and 72% self-reported a physical disability. I don't have the numbers of how many reported both, but it is quite high. I have some breakdown on the age group of the group. I think what is really interesting here, what we're seeing is that more than half of the residents are over 55, and kind of highlights what are some of the services we need to be offering, and how we can connect with senior disabled services, as well as thinking about how people are aging in place. I also note here the ethnicity. We have 87% of the residents self-report as non-Hispanic, non-Latino, and then 11% report Hispanic. I'm sorry, there's a typo there, Hispanic and Latino, Latinx, and 2% data not collected. I also have some information on race there as well. And then another piece of, thought this was important to highlight, that 49% of people reported some history of domestic violence. I think it just highlights a lot of some of the trauma that our folks have experienced prior to getting to this. And so being really trauma informed in the service delivery and how we partner with different agencies that can help support the survivors on site. Here's a quick snapshot, an update where we are. So the building opened up in August of this year. The goal is to have full occupancy by December, end of this calendar year. I'm happy to report that it's on track, not just on track, but it's actually ahead of schedule, and getting folks leased up. And the reason why we do a phase lease up, because it's we really want to make sure that people can transition as they get in. The first 3 months into housing is so critical to keeping people there, making sure they're well connected to the community, and that they get their housing stability plans in place. So, so far there have been 23 individuals housed just in the first month, 47 individuals served, and then 33 individuals already housed in the project. I mentioned that there's case management and peer support available. So it's really about providing housing-based case management, helping people understand what it is to looking at their lease, working with property management, addressing any issues if things come up or if they have any lease violations, and helping support them to stay housed there, and then having peer support available. So one of the great things is Laurel Hill Center's providers, they've really emphasized hiring peers, and then also giving people hiring preference if they have lived experience with mental health or homelessness. And so that really helps the tenants build rapport and support. And I think we have incorporated lots of lessons learned from other permanent supportive housing projects in the planning process of this one. One of the things we had the benefit of this project is we didn't open it in the beginning of a pandemic or at the height of that, so that did help. We incorporated more support around lease up in this project. I think my peer James had talked about the coordinated entry outreach team and their support in this project and getting folks moved in. That has really decreased the time it takes to get people moved into the project. We talked about really increasing behavioral health support in these projects. And so Laurel Hill Center, they have a QMHP supervisor, case managers are QMHA certified, and we have peer supports there. And then just the connection to their agency as a whole has the ACT team and other services. So, and then the other piece is really focusing on community building. So the pictures here I love is from Laurel Hill Center. They had pajama day or onesie day, I guess. And they just really focus on having different activities for the residents, and they have a resident council where they can really seek input from the residents on what do they want, what do they need to feel that this is their home and that they're connected to it. I have to share some of the activities they've done so far. So they had this shop till you drop in the community room, where they have lots of donations from just from the community, and where residents can go and get whatever they need. They had a Sunday night root beer float social. They have bingo, and they have Mindfulness Monday, where they went into the courtyard and searched for agates in the pebbles. And these are well attended. And then they have more structured support groups where they have alcohol and other support drug groups, independent living 101, money management, healthy boundaries and how to get along with others, and then mindfulness and wellness days. And then just the last, I thought I'd end the Nell update on a story on kind of and this is, still early on, but the impact it's had on residents. So we know permanent supportive housing as a whole is a really important intervention in addressing homelessness, particularly chronic homelessness, and just on the individual. So I've changed the name of the individual for their privacy and some of the details. And this is from Laurel Hill Case Manager. So Mary lives with a mental illness that impacts her daily function and ability to use coping and problem-solving skills on a regular basis. Due to this illness, she lost her family and became homeless many years ago. Her homelessness and separation from her family have been a heavy burden, which were evident in her behavior within our community, a community that has not been accepting, forgiving, and supportive of Mary's existence and well-being, something that we witness far too often. Closed doors, rejection, disgust, being misunderstood and ignored have been the experiences reported by Mary. She has been banned from many local stores, parks, and even the local bus system. Was told she's not allowed to have access to transportation until now. Since moving into the Nell, Mary has been able to make it to medical appointments. She's able to shower every day and wear clean clothes. She wears a smile most days and enjoys shopping for and cooking healthy meals. Recently, Mary asked for support while talking to a store manager at a local market she had been banned from. Watching Mary feel so empowered to advocate for herself was very rewarding. The manager was very receptive to Mary and her request. Mary is now granted access to this market and continues to rebuild her life with each new day. Another door opened, another trespass forgiven, and another chance for healing. This story is evident of the impact that supportive housing can have on people's lives. Our next goal is to help her obtain access to public transportation again, as that is a huge part of being self-sufficient. So, thank you. I'm going to go on to the next project update. I'll give a quick update on the Wildfire Recovery and Resilience Account. I'm going to refer to it as WRRA in this presentation. So a quick context on this funding, this program. So the Oregon legislature approved funding for housing recovery from the 2020 wildfires. The goal of this particular program was to move participants into immediate or permanent housing, really using the same housing first model. And then the funds can two main eligible costs, and that's for rental assistance and renovation and reconstruction. So WRRA in Lane County. So Lane County contracted with Dev Northwest in July 22 to administer the program. It's a $2.1 million contract. And again, this is a really early kind of update on how the project's going. To date, there have been Dev Northwest received 81 applications, and we are prioritizing households who are currently living in one of the hotels, one of the ODHS shelters, or if they are living in an RV or trailer that's not connected to utilities. Again, this is using a housing first model. To date, Dev Northwest has approved 28 applications, and they have funded 9 applications. So those 9 applications are kind of in different states. And I don't have on my slides, but I have some other data as well. But kind of some background on the applications so far. We've had people living in FEMA trailers, one who had a recent housing eviction notice and so is kind of precariously housed, 3 people who are living in a home of another due to the economic hardship. We have 14 of the individuals who were in ODHS shelter, and 8 living in an RV trailer not connected to utilities, and 2 of them had owned their homes. All of these individuals had their homes destroyed or major construction damage at the time of the disaster. And the type of assistance that they're requesting, 12 of them had requested rental support and finding a home they can rent. 13 had requested help for either purchasing or repairs to a manufactured home or to an RV trailer. And then 5 of them had asked for support for 5 stick-built rehab construction. And I apologize, at the time of building this slide, that was 28 applications, now 30. So here's just some of the early impacts of WRRA. I think what's been really fascinating about all of this is that they focused on the client-centered housing goals that for someone might want a rental, but that's not going to work for another person, or getting their RV or trailer fixed. And when I talked to the Dev Northwest staff and the impact on it, I think they really emphasized that a lot of folks, they wanted the RV trailer purchase, and that was what their immediate housing and what they felt was their permanent housing solution. So she shared that the first 2 clients we were able to approve were actually able to secure permanent housing back in the McKenzie Valley. As with many of our applicants, residents want to return to the Valley, the place they know and love. Families want to be closer to McKenzie schools, but the housing options have been very limited. I would love to share about also the RV exceptions and how impactful those are for folks who simply cannot afford to live in a market rate rental. Housing wait lists are still years long, and folks really want independence and choice in their permanent housing. The RV exceptions have allowed us to work with clients on a solution that meets their long-term needs and provides secure, sustainable housing without any subsidy. Some of the folks who have been approved for the RV exception will also be able to return to their beloved community. Thank you.
So now it transitions over to me, but I'm glad to welcome any questions you might have for Danelle if you'd like.
Any questions?
I just had a quick demographic question. I noticed you didn't have gender identity on the slide that had age and
Yeah, I can share. It is close. Thank you. I can add that to the slides in the future. So it is about split of male identifying and female identifying from what we can see.
Thank you.
Then I have back to the Nell. Just a quick question on that. You talked about the lease up, the gradual lease up at the Nell, which differs a little bit to the lease up at MLK Commons. Anything to talk about there? I mean, the Nell, I knew going in that we're going to be taking it a little bit more slowly. Have we have we learned any revelations based upon what's happening with the Nell versus what happened with MLK?
Yeah, I think as far as the lease up goes, what we learned is that it really helps to be able to have a team who can be mobile with clients and go out in the community and get the things that they need to get into housing. So a lot of the requirement, there are documents like IDs and proof of disability that are needed. So that requires staff time to leave the building and go get that with the client. And so, but once you're staffed, it's hard to have staff to be able to leave. So what we did with the Nell is we had the coordinated entry outreach team be available to do some of that navigation work and to be able to go and leave and still supporting Laurel Hill Center as needed. So, but I think that was one of the biggest lessons learned there is have dedicated staff and really have more staff up front as you're leasing up the building.
Excellent. And it's still early with the Nell, but my observation from my distance, from my vantage point, is that it's been a relatively smooth lease up. That it really hasn't been as much of an impact on, for instance, the first responders that MLK had. Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. That was my perception of it. So,
and I know that I appreciate the question. I know that you're being humble, and I appreciate that. But the continuous improvement that this team has been committed to is really incredible. They've made improvements all along the way, improvements in the process of gathering documentation, improvements for getting folks ready to lease up, improvements in their communication with Homes for Good, improvements in the support to get residents into the facility. Really an impressive opportunity that they have taken to learn and to grow substantially better very quickly. So just want to give that call out.
Bravo. Well done. Thank you. Thank you, Director. Ms. Budd, back to you.
Sure. So what you have in front of you is a timeline of the last 6 months of milestones within the homelessness team that I thought you might be interested in. The first in April of 2022 is the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program. Coordinated Community Plan was adopted both by the youth leadership group of the YHDP, as well as the Poverty and Homelessness Board. And this was a key need when we were provided the YHDP grant because we only had 3 months to pull this plan together and then needed to make sure that the plan met all of the HUD requirements. And so within a month of submitting that plan, it was approved by HUD, which then released the nearly $2 million over a 2-year period to Lane County to begin then an RFP process to award the grants to the different youth serving programs. In August 2022, the NEL opened, which Danielle did a great job of sharing information around. But then very quickly from there, we were notified that our Project Turnkey grant, which for Lane County, this would have been our second grant, was waitlisted. And so I share it because it doesn't sound like that's a dead end, and that there is still potential that the Oregon Community Foundation could go back to their waitlisted projects and continue to move those forward. So I wanted to make sure that was on your radar. Bridges on Broadway is our first turnkey project. And then we would be looking at, maybe a potential motel that we're leasing now for people who are at high risk of COVID as a second turnkey facility, should we indeed receive the grant. Also in September 2022, the River Avenue Navigation Center opened. I know many of you were able to go to that ribbon cutting. You've met Equitable Social Solutions, which is the agency that's running the Navigation Center. And we continue to appreciate the partnership we have with the city of Eugene. And so that facility continues to ramp up the number of residents that are residing there. And so far, Equitable is doing a great job and welcoming those folks in and helping them feel comfortable and really creating a community, which is so important in any type of a congregate facility. Also in September, the HUD Continuum of Care grant was submitted, and this is an annual grant that our program service coordinator, Amanda Borda, spearheads. It goes through the Poverty and Homelessness Board, and it is very much an opportunity first to share with HUD at the federal level what it is that our community is doing around homelessness, as well as for us to understand what is it that HUD is looking for from communities within the continuum of care. And I'll speak more a little later about what it is that we learned from this particular annual grant. In October of 2022, we have awarded grants to 4 different agencies for the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Project funds. And so we're really excited to have 3 of those programs beginning October 1st. And so they're already getting off the ground. And then we have 2 more that are going to be starting in January 1. And I'll dig a little deeper into that in a moment. Schenkel Brooklyn Street Shelter has had their ribbon cutting last week, and thank you, Commissioner Farr, for being our speaker. And we are expecting that to open very soon. We're just waiting for some insurance to come through Equitable Social Solutions, which is the agency that's going to be running that facility as well. What is exciting about Equitable running both agencies, or excuse me, both shelters, is that it provides additional flexibility. And so with Brooklyn, you have single rooms as well as double rooms. And you have in the Navigation Center primarily congregate space. And so if there is someone who, their symptoms of mental health or physical health symptoms might dictate a need for an individual space, they can move someone over to Brooklyn, which is a great kind of continuous improvement opportunity. And then lastly, we have been working on a second HUD grant that's focused on people who are unsheltered in the community. And so we had an opportunity to apply for a little over $1 million during a 3-year period. And that grant would support a program for single individuals through a rapid rehousing program. As well as housing navigators for folks who have vouchers, like Section 8 through Homes for Good, or maybe a VASH voucher through the Veterans Administration. And so we've recognized that there are people who are losing vouchers because they have a number of barriers that keeps them from being able to lease up their vouchers. And we don't want that to happen, particularly if someone is unhoused. And so we want to really go all in to help reduce their housing barriers to get them leased up with a voucher so that they have ongoing rent assistance in perpetuity. So just to dive a bit deeper in the Navigation Center, at this point, Equitable Social Solutions has welcomed over 40 individuals. There's a total of 75 beds, and so each day they're welcoming 1 to 3 people on average into the facility. Similarly to what Danielle shared, it's really important that a sense of community be built within that facility. And so Equitable has very much been focusing on just taking their time and helping the new residents feel comfortable, making sure that all of their basic needs are met, and introducing them to all the different residents that are already in the facility. So a bit more regarding the YHDP program grant. We have 3 different program areas that the grant invested in. The first being transitional housing, rapid rehousing. And this is actually a new type of housing model that has just come to fruition in the last few years. The idea being, particularly for youth, that it is challenging for youth to find permanent housing and get into their own lease, often because it's the first time that they've done that, and because they may not necessarily have the income at the levels that are needed. And so this model provides transitional housing where the lease is actually held by the nonprofit agency. And then that agency works with the youth to help them build up their income, to build up their skills, to build up their self-esteem, which is very important for the youth, and then helps them move into permanent housing so that they can remain stable ongoing. We also have outreach and access with Looking Glass providing those services here locally. This will allow them to increase the number of days that their youth outreach program is available in the community, as well as to expand the hours that their day access facility is open. We also have a brand new program in the community called a host home that is provided by a family for every child. And the focus in this program will be on youth who are in school but are either houseless or unstable in their housing. And they will be living with community members who are willing to provide a bedroom and work very closely with a home for every child to help make sure that not only the family who is sharing their home is successful, but also the youth. And what we see with those type of program is that setting really clear expectations from the beginning is very important, and then continuing to serve in a mediation type role so that, you know, those tough conversations, which are easy to not have but often fester, are occurring every step of the way so that it's a successful housing option. And then lastly, the YHDP funding will also support a new 0.8 FTE role within our homeless management information system. And the focus there is really on the data and reporting supporting needs of the YHDP grant, of our youth leadership committee, and of the PHB as we continue to move the YHDP grant forward. We know that we need to continue to assess how these programs are doing. Are they working to meet the outcomes? And then continue with that continuous quality improvement that we value so greatly, so that we can make sure that these programs are indeed reducing the number of youth that we have here in the community that are unhoused. So here's a picture of the Schenkel Brooklyn Street Shelter. The far left picture is of the previous facility before it was rehabilitated. The picture in the middle is the new beautiful facility where everything is brand new. And then the picture on the right is of the Bethel Temple Ministries pastor, as well as the elders from the church who joined us at the ribbon cutting this past week. They were amazing and really lifted up the amazing memories of Reverend Schenkel and his wife Lavinia, and of the amazing history that Bethel Temple Church has here in the community. So I greatly appreciated all of them joining us. The Schenkel shelter has 12 beds, and they're going to first be focused on people who are at high risk of COVID. Some of them will be transitioning from Motel 66, which is one of the motels that has been housing people who are at high risk of COVID. And then once those folks transition to Brooklyn, then we'll be able to kind of balance Navigation Center a little further. So speaking of the COVID motels, I've shown this slide to each of you before, and since then, University Inn has indeed closed, and that motel formerly housed people who are at high risk of COVID. And we spent weeks working to move all of the residents out of that facility and ideally into permanent housing, but also into other motels focused on that population, as well as shelters within the community. And so the next step in moving away from these COVID motels is to close the Motel 66, which has 61 rooms total. And we are working in moving the residents out of that facility in the same way that we did with University Inn. We have 4 different housing options that we're utilizing, the first being the Nell. And we did have 4 folks who moved from Motel 66 into the Nell. Because they indeed qualified for that. So that was a great transition. We also have folks that are moving from Motel 66 into our third COVID motel, which is Bridges on Broadway. And so as vacancies occur at Bridges on Broadway, folks are moving from Motel 66 into that facility. We also will be transitioning folks from Motel 66 into the Schenkel Brooklyn Street Shelter. So that's an additional 12 beds. And then we'll be transitioning folks into the Navigation Center also. And so all of those things are actively happening today. And we intend to have everyone transitioned out of Motel 66 by October 26th at the latest. We also are committed to ensuring that all of those in Motel 66 are provided with a shelter option, as well as kind of recognizing, you know, what other options might exist in the community if they're not looking to move into the options that are being provided to them. One thing to note regarding Bridges on Broadway is that it too will be closing in a while, June 30th, 2023. So it has over a year before it closes. But what is exciting is that once it closes, then preparation to transition it to a permanent supported housing facility will begin through Homes for Good. And so we, of course, will continue to work to transition those in Bridges on Broadway out into a more suitable long-term housing option, but also are in the planning phase of how do we begin to offer Bridges on Broadway as a permanent supported housing facility in the long term. So another exciting development is through ARPA funds. We were awarded dollars to provide capacity building support to our local nonprofits. And so we held for funding for this year 2 different requests for proposals. The first for general capacity building. And we were very pleased to receive 19 applicants from different nonprofits and awarded 13 of those applicants grants in order to help them increase their capacity. And that totaled approximately $650,000. A few of the ways that these grants will impact the nonprofits include training around domestic violence and sexual assault, providing role-specific training through consultants or professional organizations, as well as attendance and conferences, providing translation support, which includes translating written documents, videos, as well as a website translation. Many different opportunities around strengthening infrastructure, such as fiscal, fundraising, looking at policy assessment and development, purchasing a purchasing database to help with procurement, as well as just enhancing the training capacity that agencies have for their staff. And so we're really pleased to see the agencies come forward with the needs that they have. Each of them were a bit unique, which I'm not surprised about. And we are in the process right now of executing those contracts. We did a second request for proposal that was specifically focused on technology capacity building. And so the $260,000 approximately that were awarded really is focused on laptops and tablets, as well as software to enhance the work of nonprofits. For example, updated Microsoft systems, enhancing IT and security. But what I'm most excited about is really the opportunity that the laptops and the tablets provide for agencies to get out into the community and to be able to provide real-time supports to folks who are unhoused, and also to be able to provide supports to people in their home. And not only that, but to be able to provide real-time data entry, which just helps to improve data quality in the long run. So these are great investments, and we hope that the nonprofits see them in the same way. So we also have made notable progress in our effort to have all of Lane County be able to be impacted by street outreach teams. You may recall the TAC report, now almost 4 years old, identified the need to make sure that all parts of Lane County had outreach staff that could go out and engage with someone who is houseless. And so it is in this year that we have now all of Lane County covered by at least one outreach team. And so HIV Alliance is providing behavioral and physical health access to folks who are unhoused, helping to connect them with primary care providers, with Cahoots, if that's what's needed, with providers within their agency. And we're seeing that that's making a significant difference, because that is often a real struggle for folks who are unhoused. And they are providing their services across Lane County. We also have our internal work through our coordinated entry and through James's leadership that focuses on rural outreach. And we know that there are indeed people within our rural communities that are unhoused. And often it's very difficult for them to engage with services that are primarily city oriented. And so our outreach team works to help bridge those connections. And they've also done a phenomenal job of helping to build relationships with both formal and informal supports in those communities. I know just recently they've spent a great deal of time in Veneta, as well as Mapleton and Oak Ridge, building those relationships and making sure that they're engaging with folks who are unhoused. Looking Glass, they were recipients of the YHDP grant, now also has county-wide youth outreach, focusing on youth who are under the age of 25 and working to connect them with their multitude of services as well as other youth services in the community and coordinated entry. Whitebird now has a dedicated outreach team that is focused strictly on the city of Eugene. And that was very much a need. We certainly know that the majority of folks who are unhoused are within the city of Eugene. And so this helps to increase the capacity to engage with those folks. And then lastly, we have Fuse Outreach, and that's focused on people who have the greatest engagement in systems of care. And so those who are in and out of emergency departments, in jail, engaging with police officers. And so that's a targeted outreach team that is also Lane County focused, but spends a great deal of their time within the city areas. So exciting to have those many outreach teams available to be able to support folks, and also to know that they're coming together every other week through case conferencing that James Ewell facilitates in order to be able to identify specific folks that our community is wanting to make sure that they get housed, and engage with all those outreach teams who work with that individual that's identified to help move them forward. So that's been a really great change and a much higher level of coordination than we've seen in previous years. So this is the last slide, but this represents the Continuum of Care annual NOFA that I had referenced earlier. And I mentioned that every year when the Continuum of Care application comes out, it's an excellent way to understand, what is HUD really looking to see communities focus on? And what are they identifying as best practices and promising practices that they really would like to see communities double down their work around. And so this year with the annual application, there were a few strengths that I think are very notable that popped up, which include just having broad involvement with stakeholders and community members. We're very fortunate to have great involvement in the Poverty and Homelessness Board and the many committees of that board. And that very much shows the interest within the community, as well as the dedication of our community and nonprofit agencies around addressing homelessness. Another strength is also around the increased efforts of street outreach teams. I just shared, we've seen great growth among those, and that is showing up very well in this application, and is also well aligned with what we see that HUD is asking. A few opportunities that we're going to be focusing on this year include increasing participation of people with lived experience of homelessness. Within the Poverty and Homelessness Board, we do have representatives who have lived experience of homelessness. We also have a dedicated group, league, that is fully represented by people who have lived experience of homelessness. But we have opportunities to do more. And so this next year, we really are going to be digging deeper into, how do we engage more for people with lived experience of homelessness, and how do we get them into positions of leadership across our boards and our committees as we continue to build these strong services within our communities. And then one more opportunity that I'll mention is around training and technical assistance. The capacity building grants help considerably with that within nonprofits, but we at the county level also have opportunities to lift up and provide training around the evidence-based practices and the promising practices that we are funding here in the community. And so we got a bit off base due to COVID and having multiple priorities, but this will be a focus for us moving into this next year, is just creating a training calendar among the different practices that we want to make sure all of our providers are competent within and also aware of. The last thing I'll mention is we heard a bit about the Medicaid 1115 waiver in the last presentation, and that is also going to be instrumental in helping us increase the overall amount of resources available to folks who are unhoused and also unstable in their housing across the community. And so this is something that all of HSD is paying very close attention to, and we're really excited just about this additional support that is able to be provided not only with our housing and homelessness programs, but also across behavioral health and physical health and other entities that are supporting community members across the county. So it's an exciting development and will absolutely be impactful on the work that we do moving forward. Thank you. Any questions?
I'll bet there are a bunch, but first thing I'd like to mention, Director Gray, I'll look at you. As Ms. Budd gave us that presentation, this is how fluent she is in the work that you all are doing. Only once did she look at her notes. It's pretty impressive that you were able to give such a build informational presentation.
Don't we have amazing people here?
I'm looking at the table in front of me right now. I mean, how fortunate are we to have this kind of heart and really attention to detail? And Ms. Batista, I've been watching you for quite some time working in Lane County, and it's just such a pleasure to the way you address your work, the enthusiasm that you spread throughout the entire organization. So it really is. I just enjoy working with that. Questions for the panel? That's a lot of information. We the last time we had a presentation, we said let's have more time next time. The time before that, we said the same thing. Each time we're giving you a little bit more time, filling the time with the amazing things. And I was looking at as I wait for a cue, back at the homeless program's milestone. I looked at this list of milestones and thought, well, how many years was that over? That was over 5 months. All of these milestones that you listed that we've accomplished in just the last 5 months. So, questions? Commissioner Buck.
Thank you. To me, it was really noticeable in that quote from Mary, or whoever that is, the total change. It's amazing what you can do when you give somebody dignity and they're able to, lift up their lives in a way they weren't ever able to do before. And that's what I think makes the Housing First program so fantastic, because it just wouldn't happen. This wouldn't happen for hundreds and hundreds of people who are going through this program. And I do think we've learned so many lessons from the MLK comments. And one thing I'm hearing loud and clear is time. We need more time. And normally you want to lease up right away because you need the income in order to pay for the capital project that you just built. It's a beautiful building. And you need the rent in order to pay that. And so it's a more expensive route, clearly. But I think in the long term, it just makes everything more successful. And not only, the people who are moving in and success for their lives going forward, but for the project as a whole, and then to be able to mimic that at the next building and the next one, and knowing that we need so many more of these permanent housing homes for the people that are waiting. And every time that you come forward, I see that we're able to, you know, move our systems in a better, more efficient way. And that has taken quite some time to do. But with, you know, key hires like yourself, you know, that kind of new systems thinking and creating those efficient procedures really goes a long way. In the slide that you had just mentioned that shows the project timeline of things that are going on, I have long wanted us as a county to have a website that shows the progress of all the things that we are doing on housing. Because for the community to know what we're doing, they would have to watch one of these very long meetings, which I know that they're not going to do. People have busy lives, but I need to be able to share with the community at large what we are doing and all the advancements. And so my question is, where are we with that? And where does it live? And who updates it? And what I'm searching not for something that has extensive words. You know, I want a snapshot and updates of what's going on and how we're meeting our goals, because we need to display to the public really what does success look like as we are implementing all these different programs. So that's my first question.
So let me take that question to Jason Davis and get his thoughts, because he, of course, has done a lot of this around the Stabilization Center. Thank you very much for pointing out the site that we have available there. And he has some wonderful ideas always on how we can get our message out there, unless you have anything that is kind of underway that I don't know about, which is possible.
I think what you're sharing, Commissioner Black, is something that we're keenly aware of, and that people go to websites for information. And that is also something that our league committee through the Poverty and Homelessness Board is wanting to push and make sure that we're sharing the resources available in the community as well through our website. And so that's an effort that we've moved forward, is working with TS to be able to create a website that is user friendly and can allow folks who are in need of services, or just general community members who are interested or trying to help guide someone, can go to in order to understand what's available. And so just to share that in addition to what you shared as well is happening right now.
I appreciate that, because I look forward to being able to share that with the community, who all right now they're seeing is this enormous need. And what you've shared today and in previous meetings are all these wonderful successes. And that's what we need to be better at in communicating to the public, is that yes, there will always be need, and we as a county can't fulfill that entire need without state and federal support. But what we are doing is A through Z. And the additional people that we've been able to shelter, as you present in previous meetings, I would have to sift through and go back to our agendas, attach that, and try and get that presentation and do a presentation in public. It's just not as efficient as what I'm envisioning for us to be able to communicate on some kind of website and or social media in an ongoing, repetitive way, because this will continue to evolve as you do great work.
Thank you, Mr. Mokraski.
And Chair Commissioner Buck, this is something that's also come up in our conversations with Eugene Chamber, as their desire is also to has been to share information with not only businesses but the broader community, because again, often, you know, our residents and businesses are busy and they're focused on the things they're focused on, and so they tend to experience the challenge of homelessness in the way that they experience it, but not the totality of the the interventions and solutions that our team and our partners are working on. So so I think that's an opportunity for us as well to partner with the chamber. And I think some of this work I recall some conversations that we had with Sarai Johnson, who was our former shelter and homelessness and shelter strategist that has since left the organization. That I think she was working on some of that work. So I think there is an opportunity here for us to regroup and look at how do we better tell the story about all the good work that is happening, understanding there's still gaps, still challenges that we face. But certainly one of the gaps I think we've recognized, the chamber's recognized too, is as they've gotten more involved in this work, is there's a lot happening that the broader community is not aware of. And so how do we close that gap of information sharing?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Buck. Vice Chair Trigger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, as always, for the presentation. Just riffing on that a little bit, I think we have so much information. So it's also how do we winnow down what do we think, what is useful to us, what is community asking for? I think the idea of resources, that's a from this moment forward, but the idea of a report, I think about simple, a lot of iconography and visuals that a lot of nonprofits do of an annual report, that we could just pick some key data points that we know are things most people want to know. How many units of permanent supportive housing were built, how many people came through the Shelter and Navigation Center, those kind of data points that then year in, year out, we can plug in and create some nice charts and graphs and that express the need so people can see, yes, we're doing all this, but here's the gap, right? Number of units needed relative to how many we were able to build, sort of thing. I think the other thing we do a really great job of at Lane County is leverage. So looking at those capacity building grants and what we're able to bring in from other state and federal resources and then grant back out or provide in technical support. So talking about those partnerships and leverage, that's a huge part of how does Lane County address homelessness is through our partnerships and through leverage. So ways to express that. And then also on the prevention side, all the rental assistance and LIHEAP programs and things like that. And honestly, if we really want to start folding in some of our public health or perinatal support programs, which really are homelessness prevention in many ways. So yeah, I would be a fan of some kind of simple annual report sort of thing. I had just a couple of very specific questions to your presentation. The project turnkey that we've been waitlisted, we have a site that we're hoping to get state funding to purchase and convert into permanent supportive housing?
Not formally.
Shelter? Not formally, okay. Navigation Center, it's great to hear, if I understood you and if I'm remembering. 1 to 3 people, sort of new people come into the facility a day, and that the snapshot today is there's about 40 folks staying there. So as those operations are ongoing, hearing about that, and maybe we have Equitable Solutions back sometime early in the new year to hear, because I'm also curious, average night stay, and sort of some navigation stories. What are the services that are most frequently requested, and what are we navigating people to? How many people are going from there to what? Family reunification, market rate housing, how's that, the navigation side on top of the shelter numbers? And then my only other question is with the youth homelessness demonstration project, are those emancipated youth? What's the definition of youth in terms of age for that, those programs, particularly the host home, but writ large for that project?
Sure. Regarding the host home, it would be primarily emancipated youth, though it could also be when DHS identifies that that is an appropriate shelter option for the youth. They may not be emancipated, but they may be under the custody of DHS, and there may not be other foster options available.
And what is the age range? What do we call youth for the purposes of that demonstration project?
For the purposes of the demonstration project, under the age of 25.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Burning.
Your peripheral vision is outstanding, Chair. He's going, Commissioner Murray. First, Ms. Budd, I really want to compliment you on your command of facts and programs. I personally, since you've been making these presentations, I've also noticed they've gotten better and more focused, and you have more to say. I think because you have so much to say, you've heard 2 commissioners talk about other people need to hear about it. So I'm going to start little and end littler. On the grants to the nonprofits, I saw a multitude of them say infrastructure building and a multitude of them say capacity building. I'll be damned if I know the difference. What's the difference?
Sure. And I think a bit of it is I created it. So in my mind, capacity building is an overarching umbrella idea of just helping to improve the sustainability and the ability of a nonprofit to thrive into the future. And then when I talk about infrastructure building, it's simply helping a nonprofit with their administrative work. So,
they can sustain and thrive into the future.
Yes.
I'm just kidding you. Ms. Bautista, I used to work in LA. I'd love to know some of the work you had there, but in my work, and I'm going to get to the points Commissioners Buck and Trieger made, on all of our clean energy retrofits, we would have just dashboards, and those dashboards would be visually very appealing and easy to see the data we were trying to convey. In our instance, it was how much energy is being created by clean energy sources or how much energy is not being used because of efficiency. The question was asked, how can we tell the community? This question's been asked before and we've still not gotten an answer. And now you're doing more work and better work and it's getting more focused and there's additional resources. I think we need better that I'm going to go talk to someone about that. So I'm going to make some suggestions for what it's worth. To say we're partnering with the chamber, perhaps, Mr. Mokrahysky, to my knowledge, there's more than one chamber in Lane County. And there are labor organizations and there are nonprofits and there are advocacy groups and there are HR and other kinds of associations. I think homelessness and this issue is so pervasive, it's time we take a real look at how we can have other groups do a lot of that broadcasting for us through communication mediums that already exist, through newsletters and email newsletters that already exist. And I think all of that can point to a dashboard. I mean, maybe that's the website that Commissioner Buck was talking about, or the type of the key information that Commissioner Trieger was talking about, but something like that. And I, for one, would like to see what that will look like at the next presentation to this body. Because truly, if people, here, you're looking at a perfect example. If we don't have the fourth estate that's monitoring what is occurring, and we don't, I see no one from any media source in this room, and Board of Commissioner meetings used to be covered. And I see no investigative journalism locally. I see interesting things that 147 papers that are part of the chain, are printing. If we don't have that, it becomes even more incumbent upon us to tell our own story. And we're telling our own story in an environment that's saturated with crap. So it's just such a critical issue. I'm not suggesting I know how to get through it. But I am suggesting that democracy depends upon an enlightened electorate. And now it's becoming incumbent upon us without a fourth estate to try and do as much of that job as we can. So forgive me for ranting on, but I just really agree with all the comments that have been made. You're doing unbelievable work. You both. Thank you. You're doing unbelievable work and the message needs to get out. And here's something I've never asked, and I'll ask this. How can we help you? You don't have to answer right away.
Well, I will say the fact is that each of you are leaders in the community. And so I just really appreciate that you too are sharing what it is that the county is doing. And if you come across someone who might be able to help share the story, is, looking for additional information, feel free to connect them with staff, and we'll be glad to share that as well. But please, just continue to share what it is that we are doing, because I recognize that that's a very common question, all the way up and down the West Coast at this point.
Thank you. Commissioner Bozovich? Yeah, I don't see your hand raised, but that doesn't always mean that you don't want to talk.
There we go. Sorry, cursor got lost in the black background. So, we don't have really a good fourth estate that reports on commissioners' meetings. They do have the public aware of the impact of homelessness and the incredible amount of money that's being spent on the problem, while they're still seeing over and over again more impact. Whether it's $800,000 to clean up Washington Jefferson Park, or what happened to the poor owners of Jackson's Automotive after a homeless person broke in and started a fire and flooded the place, to the $123 million that 20 mayors are asking for from the legislature right now. That's what they're seeing, including the 1115 waiver, where now Medicaid money can be spent on housing. With all that in the background, my question is you outlined quite a few new projects and programs. Is there going to be outcome-based performance measures done for these programs? I've complimented you all on starting to keep some data about cost and effectiveness. And I think we need to keep doing that, because there's a segment of the population that is not going to support continued efforts if they don't understand that we're trying to spend these millions and millions of tax dollars in the absolute most effective way to help the people, and not just throwing it, at programs to say we're doing it. Having a list on a website of all the things we're doing, while somebody can, is hearing stories on the news about the impacts of homelessness, doesn't do much good. They need to know that we're trying to make the system better and more effective and more efficient. So are these programs like the NEL, Schenkel, and the youth programs, are they going to be measured and looked at for performance in the future?
Yes. I will share that we now are looking at performance on a quarterly basis among our contracts, and engaging in continuous quality improvement with agencies that are not on track to be able to meet their outcomes. We also, I'm very pleased to share, we have a new homeless management information supervisor. Her name is Carly Walker. She's currently a management analyst with us, and so she's already an expert in the HMIS system in her own right. And she too is very committed to helping to tell that story of what impact our programs are making in the community, and committed to really focusing on how do we create data dashboards that help not only, the staff internally within Lane County understand what's going on within our programs, but then the broader community as well. And so looking forward to those developments as we move forward into this next fiscal year.
I think the one thing I might add to that is that Steve Adams, Kachina Inman, and Karen Sachs are partnering very, very closely on reimagining the affordable housing Action Plan program, or the program that's addressing the Affordable Housing Action Plan. And I think that we really need to link dashboards on these items, because there are individuals, you might measure a program to address homelessness, and yet folks are being trapped in the system because we don't have the units to move them out into, not because we're not doing the right work in order to prepare someone for permanent housing. So as we can link those and tell that story to help folks understand what is the effectiveness of the programs we have compared to the challenges related to housing stock, I think that will help just broaden that perspective a little bit.
Thank you. And thank you, Commissioner Bozovich. Commissioner Buck, and then I'll say a few words.
Just to follow up on that, the Affordable Housing Action Plan and the restructuring that you mentioned, can you expand upon that a little bit? Because I've been wondering where it's going and how it's doing.
Why don't we schedule an update because they are really meeting right now and thinking about what is the future, and making sure that we have that solid connection between HSD and the programs that we have for individuals who are unhoused and our Affordable Housing Action Plan work. I don't have necessarily a whole lot of details to share about what that structure will look like at this time, but we'll get something on the agenda.
And I think you may hear that come back during agenda team requests at the end of this meeting, specifically an update on the report. Thank you. Just a couple of things I want to point out. Ms. Budd, since you came to Lane County, you've brought more than just a new energy regarding the programs, but you've also brought a new energy in communicating the information. And communication is essential, that we communicate in ways that people understand, say words that they understand, and in means that they understand, and in places that they understand. We haven't always been able to do all of those things at the same time. I'm going to point back to a report that was put out by the City of Eugene. The report was published around, they continued to update it until about 2005. It was a history homelessness in Lane County and homelessness programs. And it was pretty comprehensive. They've taken it off their website, but I happen to have hard copies of that report up until they quit updating it. And it really goes all the way back. It doesn't go back further than World War II. But it does go back, back into the mid 1940s when car camps were first initiated in Lane County over at what is now Skinner Butte Park. And it really is a comprehensive, but what it is, and Kate, what this is, it's a read that you can't put down once you start reading. It's like a novel, because it's not in a dashboard form. It's not a data file form. It's in a narrative. And it's a couple of paragraphs about each item and what's happened, and then with maybe another paragraph updating what has happened since the last time since it was written. I'll get you that hard copy because it's a really wonderful format that I, for one, once I first saw it, I kept it in my pocket for a long time, and unfortunately the City of Eugene no longer updates that. I think they went to dashboards instead, which the general public is a lovely thing, isn't it? Dashboard, all the information's there, but oh my gosh, give me something to read, please. And so I think that, as we look down the road, how do we communicate all of the remarkable, broad array of things that we are doing? How do we communicate in ways people understand that we actually are doing something? Because I contend that when I first was on the Human Services Commission in 1995, if homelessness were the same today as it was then, we'd have cracked the nut. It would have been solved. But it's continually evolving, which makes the additional narrative always important to update in a way, once again, that I think people want to read. And updating dashboards is a wonderful thing. And I'm looking at a plethora. I've got dashboards all over my screen right now. But once again, how do people understand it, and how do people process the information? So that's just my input on that, and I'll send you that that hard copy that I keep. I published it in Forum Lane a number of times, and it has been updated. So I'll get that to you, because it's not difficult, and it really is something that you don't have to spend a great deal of time sitting and writing everything. Just write a paragraph here and there about the things that are happening and put it into the format. And it once again, it reads like a novel, and it's the kind that is in the kind of novel that the chapters are only 3 pages long, so you can't put it down. So all of a sudden it's 4 o'clock in the morning, you're still reading, So.
You kept that whole thing in your pocket?
Oh. But, so anyway, that's my input on people understanding what it is that we're doing. And once again, I've said once again, but if things had remained the same, then even if things were the same today as they were 10 years ago, Steve, it would have been so easy. But the continuing evolution, and there are more reasons for people to be homeless. And we find, elderly women, for instance, who've lived in a home their entire life are all of a sudden homeless, which we didn't see 20 years ago. It's just a new spectrum of reasons that people are thrust into homelessness. This is a wonderful report, and we look forward to the next one. Anything further? Then I think we'll take this as a successful report. And Danielle, thank you again for all that you've done. Once again, you light up the room when you come to make a presentation to a whether it's a poverty and homelessness board, whether it's to the Human Services Commission. Thank you so much. Dr. Gray, thank you. So as we clear the room, my heart, thank you so much. We're at item number 11, Commissioner's business, and first up, announcement from the Board of Commissioners. Announcements. Oh, well, let me just look. I'm going to bring my agenda over here.
You have an announcement?
Commissioner,
We need hold music.
No, I don't have.
Nope, he says no announcement.
no announcements, Commissioner Bozievich. Then moving along to future board assignment requests. Vice Chair Trigger.
Thank you. Well, we sort of had it during the presentation, but an official assignment request and head nods to get an update on the housing action plan and the restructuring of how that work is being implemented with the policy team and HSD's new manager. Great. And then I have, I'm not sure, this is not an assignment request, actually. This is just another head nods. Sorry. I am considering, I have not yet decided, I'm assessing whether I think I have the capacity to be worth applying, but I wanted to get head nods from my colleagues as the next clear the path to me deciding whether I want to apply for a NACO leadership network position. This is an opioid solutions leadership network. It's a project they've established. So much of the expenses would be reimbursed because there will be some travel. And they're developing an opioid solutions leadership network through NACO to do some peer-to-peer learning with county officials who are looking to pursue, as they say, innovative and evidence-based solutions to the opioid epidemic. So it'll be a combination of 2 in-person convenings and 2 virtual, to study opioid abatement strategies across the continuum of care and how those ideas might be replicable and scalable in different communities and regions. So with my appointment to the opioid settlement treatment and recovery board, I thought this might be a really nice companion opportunity, but it is going to be a big time commitment. So before I go all in and ask for some staff support completing the application with the data they asked for and just deciding my own schedule, I wanted to make sure for my colleagues that there was support for me applying for that if I decide I have the capacity. Great, thank you.
Looks like you have support.
Right.
Okay, any further board assignment requests? Then Ms. Markowski, what have you heard? Reviews.
Yes, just I'm going to check because I thought that we have scheduled an update on the Affordable Housing Action Plan, but if we don't, then we'll make that an assignment.
Okay. Right, and that's the only assignment that you've received today?
I'm sorry. Is that the only assignment because there already is scheduled a update on the master plan for the Lane Event Center?
I think what
heard
you
that also.
earlier today, you're talking about earlier?
Yeah.
in the meeting. I think we indicated that the master plan update is being re-energized.
Okay,
Yeah, it's happening.
gotcha.
Yeah, I think, didn't we ask for that to be part of the work session, or at least a mention of that, of the work session on the
Yeah, if we have
LEC project
any
specifically?
additional
Yeah.
details related to the master plan for that to be part of the, you had a lot to say on that, on the work session. So that all of those things you asked and the
Mhm.
things you articulated that you want to see, we're going to incorporate into.
I felt we kind of had a mini work session. I probably started the wrong way because I knew I wouldn't be here. So I was giving my input and then
Oh, it
we
was
all
very
did.
good. And I'd say that it was very good conversation, and it was exactly what we were looking for, is feedback and kind of direction on those. So we will incorporate all those thoughts into the work session on the 1st.
All right, then I don't have anything else. I'm going to say this though, Ms. Mokrasky, today at face value looked like a light agenda. What that allowed us to do was to really dig deep into 4 different areas today and really receive comprehensive reports and have a really informed discussion among 5 commissioners on that along with staff. And I think today's meeting was kind of watershed in that regard, in that we didn't have a lot of boxes to check off, so we took the time that we needed. For instance, Mr. Solomon's report this morning wasn't really on the agenda other than just as a part of the order that we were passing. But we ended up, I think, spending better than 45 minutes on it and really having a substantive discussion about that. So I think as we look at future agendas, from time to time, this kind of a meeting is not a bad thing to plan, where we are just able to expound and expand upon the things that staff is presenting to us. Because so often we go away thinking, well, I have questions that I'll forward to staff. Well, we've got to put them out on the table today. So a well presented meeting, Mr. Mulcahy.
Yeah, and I will just say, I think that this is a conversation that I'm having with the appointed directors about, I mean, we talked about it in terms of my scope of responsibility, and but what we're really diving into here more recently and going forward is looking at how we're spending our time, right? That and this is true kind of post-pandemic, that we've now have incorporated this. There's this sort of expectation you're always available and you're always doing, and what's created in a lot of our worlds is a running around, right? And running from meeting to meeting, and what that has a tendency to do is not leave enough time to have the types of conversations you had today, right? So because typically what you're doing in these board meetings, for example, is you're dealing with business. You have action you have to take. What happened today was you had a little less on the business side and more on the kind of policy, thought leadership, work session. And that gives you, when you have that space, and this is true for all of our folks that are working, right? If you're just grinding away at meeting after meeting or task after task, and you don't have the time, particularly as leaders who are decision makers and trying to strategize and move big things forward, if you don't have the space to dive into those real big thorny issues, then you're just kind of doing thing after thing. So I think I just say that for context, it's a good reminder to all of us to step back every once in a while and go, okay, how are we spending our time? Is it not only the most efficient to get the work done that we have to get, but are we carving out time to be the best thought leaders, policy makers, decision makers that we can?
And a lot of our time is spent listening to the loudest shouters, and it really consumes a great deal of our time, and we end up forgetting how much work staff is accomplishing and how many balls we are moving up the hill at the same time here at Lane County. The fact that the presentation that was the last presentation we had about how many different things that we are working on surrounding homelessness and housing, and so I think it really is a good reminder, not just to us but to the public, that the work of the county is broad. It's not just the thing that you're interested in. Even though you are interested in that particular thing, there are so many more things going on, and it really is unfortunate that we don't get media coverage on that. And maybe somebody is listening to us right now in our presentation. Maybe somebody from one of our local media sources is listening, and we'll hear articles about, or we'll read articles about what it is that the business that we're conducting. Otherwise, it really becomes incumbent upon us to be the reporter, right? The harbinger, so to speak, or the herald. So with that,
I just want to say I had a chance to look at our future agenda item list real quick, and we do have an affordable housing action plan tentatively scheduled for November 8th. So
Thank
I
you.
read it.
Judy Williams texted me that too. So I'm gonna let you know. I think we'll take that off the assignments list because it's scheduled to come before you.
Which is a reminder that just because we don't see anybody in the room doesn't mean that people aren't watching.
Right.
Because
Yes.
early this morning, Mr. Kyler appeared out of no place.
Yes.
So what were you watching someplace? Well, yeah, it was. So people are paying attention one way or another. So with that, is there any more business for today's Board of County Commissioners? We have no reason for executive session. So our next meeting is Tuesday, the 25th at 9 a.m. With that, we are adjourned.
Great meeting.
That was a great meeting.